I was checking out the Rachel Madow show last night, and she released some PPP polling data, which I thought was pretty interesting, in that most of the stuff on it is pretty much negative Donald Trump. And I'm taking a chuckle at this because I'll be willing to bet you that if they had taken this poll before the election, the numbers for the most part would have looked quite a bit different. But now that reality is set in, the numbers are, in my opinion, more realistic of what people actually believe. Here we go.
We'll start right at the top. Do you approve of President Donald Trump? The president of Americans who say yes, they approve of Donald Trump is 44%, which is in keeping with the historically low approval ratings this president has, the lowest of any incoming president ever in U.S. history.
Now, hang on. Okay, look at the question. Okay, it's not do you approve of Donald Trump. The question actually is, do you approve or disapprove of President Trump's job performance? Okay, now this poll was taken between January 23rd and January 24th. The man had been in office, okay, from the 20th, so that was 3-4 days. He hasn't really done anything other than issue executive orders, okay? So basically, if only 44% of the people, okay, that say they approved, obviously that means 56% of the people disapprove of his job performance over 4 days. Even I, who can't stand this guy, cannot say I disapprove of his job performance. Now, that's unless you want to factor in the personal crap with Twitter. Now, if you factor that in, then yeah, I can go along with it. But I consider job performance stuff that he actually does on the job. And the only thing he's done thus far is issued a bunch of executive orders, okay? So, he's basically done his job. You might not like his job, but he's done his job.
So in this new PPP poll, approval rating for Donald Trump is 44%. Next question. Do you approve of the women who participated in marches across the country this weekend? The percentage of Americans who say yes, they approve of the women who marched this weekend, that number is 50%. So more Americans approve of the marchers this weekend than approve of the new president. That is probably going to bother him. And it's not just bad news for him, it's also bad news for the most visible member of the new administration, the new White House press secretary, Sean Spicer.
This was the largest audience to ever witness an inauguration, period.
No, it wasn't. So, question to the American people in this new national poll, do you believe that? The actual phrasing of the question is, do you think Donald Trump's inauguration had the biggest crowd of any presidential inauguration in history or not? The answer from the American people, not. I'm sorry, well, look at that. I'm sorry, White House spokesman Sean Spicer. It's not working. What you're doing, it's not working. By a margin of 62 to 18%, Americans are fully aware that this was not the biggest inauguration in history, despite what the White House is telling them.
All right, let me stop you right there. Remember that previous poll of whether Americans approve or of the marches, and it was 50%? I wonder how many people disapproved of the marches because they didn't show that particular portion. So if like 50% approved and only like 10% disapproved and the other 40% basically had no opinion, that, in my opinion, is not that big of a deal, okay?
In fact, this new national poll shows that in addition to being aware that this inauguration was not the largest in history, the American people are also aware that that women's march in D.C., which happened the day after the inauguration, the American people are aware that that march was larger than the Trump inauguration turnout. And Americans are aware of that by a margin of 54% to 29%. So again, this new poll is exclusive to us. We're the only people who have these poll results this evening. But just as a baseline for where the new president is starting and for whether or not people believe the new administration when it speaks to them, this is not a good place they're starting at. And in terms of what's coming down the road, what's coming next for this new administration, the rest of the poll doesn't offer good prospects in terms of how the American people are likely to react and what they say they want from the new president. Let me show you what I mean. Today, of course, by now you've heard, the new president signed an executive order to build a wall or something like a wall along the southern border. There was also news from the Republican-controlled Congress today that they will soon be moving legislation to make we, the American taxpayers, pay for that wall. At least initially. Sure, the president promised it would be Mexico paying for that wall, but if you believe that, it's going to be U.S. taxpayers putting up the money for the wall, at least for now. And so here is the question. Literally, here's the question from the poll. If the American taxpayers have to pay up front for it, do you support or oppose building a wall with Mexico? Answer from the American people, oppose. Oppose by a 19-point margin. Here's another one. Do you think Donald Trump should release his tax returns? The answer from the American people, yes. He should release his tax returns. That's what Americans believe by a 27-point margin. Take that a little further. Here's question 13 from this new poll that we've got exclusively tonight from PPP. Quote, would you support or oppose a law requiring that a candidate for president has to release 5 years of tax returns in order to appear on the ballot? Would you support that? American people say, yes, we would support that by a 20-point margin. Here's question 15. Do you think Donald Trump should divest his business interests? Answer from the American people, yes. Yes, we think that. By a 33-point margin, Americans believe he should divest from his businesses, which is something he has not done and apparently has no intentions of doing. And now you get to the really hurtful ones. Now you get to the ones that are really going to hit him close to the heart. This is question 16 from this new PPP national poll that we've got exclusively. The question is, do you like Russia? Answer from the American people, no. No. By a 47-point margin, no, we do not like Russia. Okay, let's get specific. Do you like this man? Do you like Vladimir Putin? The answer from the American people, no, 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 no. No, by a 57-point margin, the American people do not have a favorable view of Vladimir Putin. And here's the thing. Even Donald Trump's supporters are apparently going to have a hard time with our new president's as yet unexplained love and affection for Russia, and specifically for Vladimir Putin. Those numbers we just showed on Russia and Putin and how Americans feel about them, those were for the American people as a whole. But look at the poll results just for Donald Trump voters. Even if you just ask Trump supporters, Trump voters, they don't like Russia either by a 27-point margin. They don't like Putin either by a 40-point margin. Even Trump voters do not like Putin, 55 to 15%. And that is now politically important news. I'm glad PPP did national polling on that subject. I'm glad they took a big enough sample that we're able to get statistically significant results, even for subgroups like just Donald Trump supporters. It's important. This was part of the reason I asked them if we could have this poll exclusively tonight, because I think this is a newsworthy result. This is one that's about to be politically important, because the House and Senate Intelligence Committees have both now started in on investigating Russian government efforts to help Donald Trump win our last presidential election. And the new president and his team keep dismissing the importance of that subject as if people don't care about it. But people do care about it. And people don't like Russia or Vladimir Putin. And so this issue is likely to stick to our new president as a problem, when even his own voters, even his own supporters, even now remain so widely skeeved out by Russia and specifically by Vladimir Putin. I mean, our new president has continued his Russia and Putin love affair unabated, but he has yet to explain it. And if we are going to get an explanation, if there is going to be a substantive, ongoing, long-term investigation into what Russia did and how Donald Trump benefited from it in the presidential election, that's going to stick politically, even with his own supporters. And that's notable, that is all the more remarkable given what else Donald Trump supporters feel and believe. Because there is one building block here in this new polling data that the new president and the new administration do actually sort of have to be happy about. It's very specific. I think to the rest of the country it's a little weird. But now that Trump and company are in power, it is starting to feel like it might be a little bit of a warning or maybe some foreshadowing for the rest of it. And this is what it is. This is what I mean. These numbers that I just gave, the results I showed about the size of the Trump inauguration and the comparison of the inaugural crowd to the Women's March and all that stuff, those results I was showing were for the country as a whole. Right? So the country knows that Donald Trump didn't have the biggest inauguration. The country knows that Donald Trump didn't have as big an inauguration as Barack Obama did. The country knows that the Women's March actually had a better turnout than the inauguration did. The country as a whole knows that. But check this out. If you just ask Trump voters, if you only look at the results from people who say they support Donald Trump and they voted for him for president, those people, Trump voters, they believe that Donald Trump did have the biggest inauguration in U.S. history. They definitely think he had more people at his inauguration than Barack Obama did at his. Naturally, they are absolutely convinced that the Trump inauguration had a larger turnout in Washington, D.C. than that dumb Women's March did the following day. They also believe, I kid you not, they also believe that most of the women who protested this weekend at those giant marches, Trump supporters believe that most of the women who marched were paid to do so by George Soros. Really, most of them. It must have been a very complicated payment scheme. But that is what Trump voters believe. Soros paid them all. And of course, none of that is true. None of that is true. But the fact that Trump voters believe all that untrue stuff, that is starting to be of renewed political importance, because this is not the campaign anymore. It's not that people are supporting their chosen candidate because of stuff they believe about the world that isn't true. There are people now who are looking at the world who still believe things that are wildly and provably untrue, who are the base of support for this president now that he is in office. And that's important. That may be, depending on how you look at it, either the silver lining for what's otherwise bad news, or that may be the building block for what the new administration feels they have to work with in terms of starting this presidency. Because it's one thing to have the country like you or not. It's one thing to have your supporters, like you and trust you, and the rest of the country doesn't like you and trust you. It's one thing if your supporters have, different opinions or feelings about the world that set them apart from everybody else in the country. I get that. But it is another thing altogether if your supporters are deluded, if your supporters are flat out operating from a whole different, mostly false set of facts that they don't share with anybody else and that aren't true. And Trump supporters really are. And we are now, as of tonight, getting the first national polling data that proves that. And what is weird and what's happening in politics right now is that the forces supporting Donald Trump in Washington and trying to figure out how they are going to careen through his presidency with supporters like this, it may be that they believe that is a good thing and they want to build on that. And we are seeing the first concrete signs of that now. And that story's next.
All right, so basically, you saw the polling numbers, and polls are basically just snapshots in time, and sometimes they are outliers, sometimes they're not. PPP normally does a pretty decent poll, but it just goes to show you that there are a lot of people out there that are living in an alternate reality and cannot recognize facts when they are staring them in the face. And this does not bode well for us going forward.